Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today I'm talking about an early contender for Book of the Year, and that is I Claudius by Robert Graves. If you're following my Instagram, you would know that a video on I Claudius would be coming out. So if you want to get early glimpses into what videos I might potentially be making, I recommend following my Instagram. There'll be a link in the description below. So I'm a huge fan of ancient Roman history, as you can tell if you've watched pretty much any of my videos. And I Claudius has been a book I've been wanting to read for a very long time. If you don't know who Robert Graves is, he is a Oxford scholar, a poet, a critic, a literary professor who taught all around the world, and above all, a writer. And the reason why he wrote I Claudius is allegedly, at least that's what I read, is because he wanted money. He was in need of money, and so he wrote this book, and I'm so happy they did because this book is absolutely fantastic. And just so you know, I will be going into some slight spoilers into this video. This is based off of actual history, so just be aware of that. And I know what happens. I've read this history before. I've read Suetonius and Tacitus's works on this period of time, and it didn't damage my enjoyment for this book at all. If anything, it enhanced it. And just be aware of that going in. There will be some slight spoilers, but they're all spoilers that follow actual historical events. So first, let's discuss the writing style of I Claudius. It is written in a first-person memoir/history. So it's from the first-person perspective of Claudius. He's writing it later in his life as a means of recording his own history and the history of what's going on during the time of his life. And so, yes, it's in first person, but it also has Claudius as a character commenting on events as well as scenes of dialogue, but mainly it is just Claudius recapping history some years before he was born, throughout his life up to the day he literally becomes emperor. And originally, it was a bit of, I was a little taken aback by the first couple of chapters because it's very heavy on recapping, mainly the events of the civil war between Augustus Caesar and Mark Antony. And again, as someone who studied this topic, I was kind of like, okay, I know what happens here. I don't really understand the point of it. I'm sure Graves put it in because people who are reading the book probably will not be as aware of this period of time, but I was kind of wondering, is this just going to be like a recapping of history? Like, would I just be better off reading Suetonius or Tacitus? But no, as the book goes on, it becomes obsessive, especially once you start getting into Claudius's life and what's going on around him, mainly during the reigns of Tiberius and Caligula. I could not put this book down. It's one of the very few instances in which, as soon as I put the book down, I couldn't stop thinking about it until I was reading it again. Graves' prose here and his control of the character of Claudius and his well-rounded views are brilliant. And there's so much character in life within Claudius, and there's so much to gain out of his reactions to what's going on during major historical events that it's really great, and it's really insightful, and it's funny, and it's dark, but because it has that human element. It's not an omnipotent third-person narration. It's someone who's emotionally attached, and in many cases his life was at stake during many of these events, and it really comes across in the prose. Or he knows people whose lives are at stake and die, and that comes off in the prose as well. I have to give testament to Robert Graves' ability as a writer. Again, this is my first Robert Graves novel, and now that I finished this book, I really want to read the entirety of his catalog, because you can tell he's put in the research here. And there are so many like random events and random characters that I'm like, that had to have been made up by Graves, and that's okay. It's fiction, so I'm not trying to read it for the sake of nitpicking inconsistencies of the history, but lo and behold, most of the characters and events that I wasn't sure about ended up being true, and they were, minor parts of Tacitus or Suetonius that I didn't pick up on, or Livia that I didn't pick up on, but it just goes to show how much effort he put into researching these characters in this period of history. And as I said with Yevgeny Onegin, the narrator is human, and so he's flawed, and that also comes across in the prose here. Claudius loves history, and he loves culture, and he loves language, and he loves myths, and there are often times where he's talking about a historical event, and then he'll go off on this multi-page diatribe on the Etruscans and their culture and their language, because he was writing a book about the Etruscans at the time. And it's frustrating in one way, because you're reading, you're like, wait, why are we going off on this tangent? And then the editor of the fictional editor of Claudius's memoir is saying, Claudius, you need to get back on track here. This is just rambling. But it just develops the Claudius character too. And so I'm glad that it's there ultimately. And so this book follows mainly Claudius as he lives under the reign of three different emperors, the first being Augustus, then Tiberius, then finally Caligula. And the thing I really appreciated about this book is how each emperor's reign feels distinct. Augustus's reign can best be classified as this time of perceived safety, of cultural revolution, but also like an iron grip upon the population. You have your role and you will stay in that role, and you will not try to rise above whatever Augustus wants you to rise above. It's safe, but it's also, you do not have the liberty or the freedom of progress that you did during the time of the Republic. Tiberius's reign is significantly different. He is a damaged individual. His history is very much, the way he's portrayed in this book is very much akin to how Suetonius and Tacitus betray him. And his rule I can best compare to like a Stalin-esque Soviet Union time period, in the fact that it's very much a time of paranoia. So he is killing people, mainly patricians, left and right, based on charges of maiestas, which is just this vague term that was created, or not created, but it was definitely brought back up during his reign of supposed political conspiracy based on really no grounds. So people are being taken away left and right, thrown in prison, or they're starved to death, or maybe outright executed. And all of this is being spearheaded by Tiberius' equivalent to what Stalin had with Bering, and that character is Sejanus, who is his number two. He is this guy who knows everyone. He has spies everywhere. He knows everyone's secrets, and whatever secrets they don't have, he makes up for them so he can have dirt on them, and then throw them in prison, and then kill them if he thinks that they're a threat. And the dynamic between Tiberius and Sejanus is great, and Caligula's reaction to this time period in which he's more oppressed than during the time of Augustus, because this guy Sejanus is just so calculating and so deceptive and sick. And watching that play out, and then Sejanus' ultimate downfall, is ultimately very satisfying as well. And then finally, there's the Caligula reign, which is just complete chaos, absurd chaos, humorous chaos, but also Graves never takes away from the actual tragedy and like the actual horror of the time period, as well as Claudius is almost killed a number of times by Caligula. He can't defend himself at all because Caligula thinks he's a god, and if he tried to defend himself, then that would only ensure his death. But seeing how Claudius reacts and interacts with Caligula and his absolute insanity is just so brilliant to watch. I'm going to read an excerpt right now that really captures Graves' attempts at humor, accomplished attempts at humor with the reign of crazy Caligula. So just for some context for this scene, Caligula thinks that he's a god, and he thinks that he is Jove, and there are scenes way prior to this in which he's walking around like a god, walking around like several gods actually throughout the book, and he's about 26 at this time and has absolute power. And I'll just read the scene out as follows, as he declares war against Neptune. So he was comforted, and the next day drew up his army in order of battle on the seafront, archers and slingers in front, then the auxiliary Germans armed with assegais, then the main Roman forces with the French in the rear. The cavalry were on the wings and the siege engines, mangonels and catapults planted on sand dunes. Nobody knew what on earth was going to happen. He rode forward into the sea as far as Penelope's knees and cried, "Neptune, old enemy, defend yourself. I challenge you to mortal fight. You treacherously wrecked my father's fleet, did you? Try your might on me if you dare." Then he quoted from Ajax's wrestling match with Ulysses and Homer, "Or let me lift thee, chief, or lift thou me. Prove we our force." A little wave came rolling past. He cut at it with his sword and laughed contemptuously. Then he coolly retired and ordered the general engagement to be sounded. The archers shot, the slingers slung, the javelin men threw their javelins. The regular infantry waded into the waters as far as their armpits and hacked at the little waves. The cavalry charged on either flank and swam out some way, slashing with their sabers. The mangonels hurled rocks, and the catapults heaved javelins and iron-tipped beams. Caligula then put to sea in a war vessel and anchored just out of range of the missiles, uttering absurd challenges to Neptune and spitting far out over the vessel's side. Neptune made no attempt to defend himself or to reply, except that one man was nipped by a lobster, and another stung by a jellyfish. Caligula finally had the rally blown and told his men to wipe the blood off their swords and gather their spoil. The spoil was the seashells on the beach. Each man was expected to collect a helmetful, which was added to a general heap. The shells were then sorted and packed in boxes to be sent to Rome in proof of this unheard-of victory. The troops thought it great fun, and when he rewarded them with 4 gold pieces, a man cheered with him tremendously. As a trophy of victory, he built a very high lighthouse on the model of the famous one at Alexandria, which was since proved a great blessing to sailors in those dangerous waters. So yes, Caligula's reign is a period of complete absurdity in which everyone has to play along or else they risk their lives. And Claudius's sarcastic tone throughout this whole scene is just so great and adds so much life to what's going on, and it's so funny. I was laughing during the scene when I first read it. But then, as I said, 2 scenes later, Caligula tries to push Claudius off of a cliff, and Claudius cannot defend himself because, again, that would only ensure his death. And fortunately, I think he does get pushed off the cliff, but he says that he's so fat that he's buoyant, and that's how he survives, and he comes back, and Caligula has no more interest in killing him anymore. So there's just so much to garner from the character depth here, and none of it is really explained to you. Everything is just inferred. You can just pick up on it based on actions and based on Claudius's reactions and all that. And even though I know what happens during this book, I know the historical events, I was surprised so many times by these little scenes that Robert Graves puts in. And finally, I just want to compliment 2 more aspects of this book. One being the battle scenes. So during this time period, especially between the middle and half of this book, Rome is heavily engaged in warfare with the German tribes. So Claudius covers events like the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, which is the biggest Roman loss at the time, where Varus and thousands of his men are killed by Hermann, who is the leader of the German tribes against Augustus. But then also it covers Germanicus's battles against Hermann, and these scenes are really, really well described, really, really well played out. And even though it sort of breaks in part the idea that this is written from Claudius' perspective because it's so detailed on Germanicus's events here and what he does. At the same time, Germanicus and Claudius are great friends, so it would make sense that Claudius would know everything that happens during Germanicus's campaigns in Germany because they're writing letters to each other, and you can infer that these adaptations are actually from Germanicus's letters to a certain extent. So it makes sense there. And I also want to compliment the book's dialogue, because the dialogue is really great. As I said earlier on, it's just paragraphs and paragraphs of recounting history, and that is pretty consistent throughout the book. But when Graves does actually play out scenes, it's really great as well. And the scene I'm going to read right now comes between a young Claudius reading in the library, talking with one of his heroes, I guess, one of his mentors, Asinius Pollio, who was a patrician and a trusted ally of Augustus, who at this point is a very, very old man. The old man then took me by the shoulder. By the way, I'll tell you something, Claudius. I'm a very old man, and though I look brisk enough, I have reached the end. In 3 days I shall be dead, and I know it. Just before one dies, there comes a strange lucidity. One speaks prophetically. Now listen. Do you want to live a long, busy life with honor at the end of it? Yes. Then exaggerate your limp. Stammer deliberately. Sham sickness frequently. Let your wits wander. Jerk your head and twitch with your hands on all public and semi-public occasions. If you could see as much as I can see, you would know that this was your only hope of safety and eventual glory. Claudius said, Livy's story of Brutus, the first Brutus, may be unhistorical, but it's apt. Brutus pretended to be a half-wit, too, to be better able to restore popular liberty. What's that, popular liberty? You believe in that? I thought that phrase had died out among the younger generation. My father and grandfather both believed in it. Yes, Pollio interrupted sharply. That's why they died. And so you know the historical Claudius, especially through Suetonius's chapter on Claudius. He was very much bullied for his stammer, for his limp, for all these disabilities that he had. and yet he became emperor through impossible odds. He survived a period of history where you were more likely to die, where you were more likely to get murdered or poisoned than you were to live to be an old man. And Claudius, again, despite the odds, lived to be that old man. And even though Suetonius and Tacitus never say that he faked any of these, Graves infers that he did fake them or heighten them based on Asinius Pollio's advice, and that's why he managed to survive. And again, this is more development like that. Like, again, because I know the story, but Graves has added so many insights and different, his own thoughts on the history and his own reading between the lines that I just think really elevates the story up just from being a normal recap of history. And if I'm going to get into some cons, the first con would actually be not enough dialogue scenes. I love the dialogue scenes. I love when people are talking, and there's not enough of it, in my opinion. But going back to Graves's interpretations of the historical text, my biggest problem with I Claudius, and again, it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty minor, but the portrayal of Livia, I think, sort of goes against what the book is supposed to be about. These are complex characters, and this is the most spoilery part of the book, so just be aware. Livia is essentially just like a mustache-twirling villain here. She's a psychopath. She poisons family members, people part of Augustus's in Augustus's power group, and just doesn't feel bad about it. And there's I think a small excerpt in Tacitus where he speculates that maybe Livia killed Augustus, even though that doesn't make any sense because he was already in his 80s. So like during a time period, people would scrape their knee on the ground at 25 and then be at risk of dying. And so like it's perfectly reasonable to conclude that Augustus died of old age. But I think Livia gets a bad rap through histories because she's a very ambitious woman. But just because you're ambitious doesn't mean you're going to be poisoning people left and right without feeling bad about it. And so I also cards on the table, I'm writing a historical fiction book about Tiberius, and first of all, Claudius was a huge inspiration for me. This book helped me tremendously with giving me a better idea of how to actually write historical fiction about the time period. But my Livia is completely different from the portrayal of Claudius here, and I really just think like that was really the one character that really left me sour because it just doesn't make any sense. Like she confesses later on in the book that she poisoned Augustus, that she poisoned Agrippa and her whole family, but it's like, why would you not poison these people years before? Like, why would you wait until Agrippa's had several children with multiple wives and then decide to poison him when he's in his 50s and has basically lost a majority of his power because Augustus has overthrown him for younger Romans? And why would you not murder Augustus when he had Tiberius as his number one heir during a tumultuous time of the reign? Why would you not murder him then and then ensure Tiberius was put on the throne at a much younger age when he wasn't mentally corrupted by Augustus's tortures? It just doesn't make any sense. And for a book that's so nuanced, I was really underwhelmed by it. But on the flip side, because this is from Claudius's perspective, maybe this is Claudius' attempt to slander her name. That is also a possibility. But again, it's supposed to be, I feel like Claudius is supposed to be like a reassuring and like a level-headed character. So like when you're reading these excerpts by him in his histories, you're supposed to take it seriously, I believe. And especially because it so closely follows Suetonius and Tacitus, that I think the implication here is that Suetonius and Tacitus in this universe used Claudius's memoirs to write their own histories, because they were not alive during this time period. So really, just the Livia thing was the only thing that left a sour taste in my mouth here on an otherwise phenomenal book. And again, it doesn't really take away from it. It just felt very underwhelming to me and just absurd. It just didn't make any sense. And just to further prove my point, here's a passage from Suetonius about Livia. So Tiberius is upset with Livia, and this is the reason why. He became especially insistent on this point when a fire broke out near the temple of Vesta, and news reached him that Livia was directing the civilian and military firefighters in person, as she had frequently done when Augustus was still alive, and urging them to redouble their efforts. So here we have psychopathic murdering Livia directing firefighters around to save a temple. And of course, Robert Graves has so many passages from Suetonius and Tacitus in his works, but conveniently he leaves this passage out. So why did he do that? To further validate this point that Livia was apparently the psychopathic murderer, which she was not. But yeah, sorry, a small rant. I don't want to end this review on a sour note, but I love I Claudius so much. This is a 10 out of 10 book for me. This is a must read for me. I would recommend this if you have even a slight interest in historical fiction, or if you like character development in character stories, because this is great. But this one little issue just really grinds my gears, but not to the point where, again, it doesn't detract from the novel at all, because it's a 10 out of 10 read, as I just said. So thank you. If you've read I Claudius, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on the book are. If you read anything else by Robert Graves, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, because I want to read everything this person has written, because he clearly has done his research, and he's done his research, and he also has the mind to give things his own, to read between the lines, and, take risks with the text as well. I'm all for taking risks. I don't think that he should have just faithfully followed the histories if he thought he had a good story to tell. Especially because Tacitus and Antonius were not historically accurate either. But that's beside the point. So thank you. Let me know what you think about I Claudius, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video. Thank you, and goodbye.